Tato, thank you for inviting us to your studio today. I just want to get the ball rolling by asking a really simple question. Why painting? Why do you paint?
In simple words, I paint because I can't talk in any other way. For me, this is the only and most powerful way of expressing myself.
I'm really interested in your passion for off-roading and going into these places that are really unmapped and creating your own coordinates for identifying with the landscape. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that passion for off-roading and how that relates to your artistic practice.
For me, the most powerful moment comes when I come upon locations of complete silence. Locations where one can hear only the sounds of nature, where I also come across animals. Naturally, these places are also associated with fear. The element I like to interact with. In my works, contact with nature is needed as visual material, nothing more. I never try to recreate an image of a specific location or region. My journey is not about the discovery of places that I would afterwards paint. For me, the landscape is just a spoken language, a language that I am most familiar with, and which seems to be the most natural one for me to use.
Something I'm really struck by in encountering your paintings is this point that you bring the viewer to, where expectation begins and ends. It's this liminal state with what is familiar becomes disfamiliar. And I want to talk a little bit about this point, about expectation and boundaries of expectation.
At a certain point, I wish I could suggest more unexpected elements to viewers, rather than create expectations. I don't think about creating expectations at all. Therefore, the boundaries you mentioned, Alex, are very important, because I myself see these margins at all times. There exists a line between reality and the imaginary, a dream and clarity, sleeping and conscious states of mind. I am not sure we have a word to describe it in Georgian. Personal memories can never be 100% objective. They are always subjective and differ from reality. It is this unity of reality and subjective perception that interests me most. I am interested in their coexistence.
I'm struck by the point where you place the viewer in your drama that you create. Sometimes you enter into a scene when viewing your work, like this one behind us, where it seems as though the climax has already happened, and we're kind of looking back on a story and trying to figure out chapters that were written before we reached it. So I want to think about how you create these dramatic arches in your work.
Before starting to work on the surface of a canvas, I think about painting a story that has already occurred. But at this point, I still don't know what the story will be about. In addition to reactions, I also have to deal with accumulated emotions and psychological conditions. I need to show the final episode of a story. However, I am interested in the fact that there exists no ending at all. My works never have an end. They never say anything about how the story ended. I don't think about the viewers, manipulations, or any questions I may pose. I have no such plan. I don't do anything to trigger the maximum number of questions. During the working process, I try to be closer to and communicate with myself. An image on a surface is the result of this process. I would say that this is more about an enigmatic situation rather than a disturbing uncertainty. It is not part of a bigger uncertainty that may cause anxiety. It is mystery that is important to me, the vague state of a work.
I want to speak about the role of perspective in your paintings, as well as the viewer's proximity to the scenes they are encountering. At times when I see your paintings, it's as if I'm seeing it through some sort of telescope, that I'm seeing it from afar, but I'm being drawn in. And then sometimes through a microscope, so I'm seeing real extreme details. You have an incredible control over this proximity question.
This happens in a natural way or beyond my control, so I don't even notice it during the working process. I can't exist without space. Accordingly, it happens naturally that I create a perspective or a space in my works. One of my reasons for spending time in Javakheti is that I haven't been able to find a similar space anywhere in Georgia. This is the place where I come as close as possible to myself, because for me, the micro and macro universes are two parts of a whole.
I want to speak about the role of black in your paintings, which appears quite frequently as frames and as almost floods that fill the canvas. I'm really struck by this idea of black as a portal, or black as a void that you get to wake up from. Can you speak a little bit about why you're drawn to that shade in particular?
For me, black is not a color. It does not exist. It's an infinite space that can be entered, a space where you can exist. For me, this color is so light and ethereal that it is impossible to show it. That's why I do something quite the opposite and use thick layers. I don't want to say that there is a resemblance, but I'm reminded of Ishika's paintings and iconography, where the light is so overwhelming, divine, airy, and related to white that it needs to be painted in black.
If black is a foundation in a lot of your paintings, red also plays a large role. And when you look across your portfolio, you encounter red as sort of a red flag, or a caution or warning.
Firstly, I would like to point out that in my paintings, red is never the color of blood, or a symbol of blood. I have been asked many times if a red spatter or spots in my works represent blood. I never show blood in my works. For me, red is the color that can show contrast in the best possible way. I never know beforehand where I might specifically place red in my painting. I am just following my intuition. I imagine a very sharp object that will cut your hand if you touch it.
I think something that I'm struck by when I view your paintings is that I almost feel the reaction on my skin. It makes my skin kind of tingle or tickle. It sends a shiver down your spine often. I want to talk about the senses that are stimulated in viewing your work. There's a sense that when encountering one of your paintings, the climate in the room changes.
I'll say it for the first time, but I fully agree with you. If I don't feel the work with my skin, it is doomed to be destroyed.
One of the real privileges of doing this conversation in your studio is that we get to see the objects that you surround yourself with when you are creating your work. It's a real privilege to see these talismans and possessions that you decide to keep you company when you're working. I noticed that you have a shell on the shelf over there that maybe came from a beach or something like this. I love this idea that when you bring a shell to your ear, you can hear the sea. I often get a sense when I view your paintings that when I get closer to the canvas, the painting starts to speak or have sound somehow, and that by drawing ourselves closer in, we're joining that conversation somehow.
Music that resembles sounds and that does not have a melody one can sing is very important to me. You can always find a shell on a shelf in my workshop. I take them with me whenever I move to a new studio. These shells are very important to me. I purchased them on the ocean shore when I visited Etretat, and I brought them to Tbilisi.
I want to ask a more conceptual question about the artist as collector and about how you surround yourself with these objects and you accumulate these objects over the course of your travel and of course of your journeys that you take. The things that you surround yourself with have a really palpable aura. They evoke a sentiment, they evoke a history, they evoke a narrative that you have inherited. I want to speak a little bit about this mentality of collecting.
I am very much interested in stories, in history in general, and in observations, watching different psychological states and feelings. They all belong to one large notion of collecting. I believe that from among the objects a person collects during his entire lifetime, nothing will get lost deliberately or accidentally. They become part of this person, since there exist no emotions, no time or events torn out of context. For me, they always represent parts of a large, interesting chain.